A massive battlefield littered with blades and broken bodies sets the stage for the end of a long war, where the Necromancer Archimonde collapses under the weight of a fatal strike, feeling the holy sword run him through as his life force begins to drain away, while the coalition forces celebrate their victory, convinced they have finally taken down the monster, naming the fallen villain as the devil who ravaged their continent, and identifying the dying man as the infamous Necromancer Archimonde, who realizes his end is finally here as he gasps for air, reflecting on the decade-long war where elite forces finally managed to infiltrate his defenses, acknowledging that despite his best preparations, this is his complete and total defeat, all brought to fruition by a single man, Berkel Reinlant, the leader of the Northern Knights, who stands over the dying mage and claims that this was a group effort, insisting that the sacrifices of his comrades are the only reason he managed to land that final blow, before demanding that Archimonde surrender for the sake of the continent. But the dying necromancer spits out a command for him to be silent, accusing the knights of watching idly while the plague claimed countless lives, and calling them worse than animals for daring to preach about peace now, with hatred burning in his eyes for every single one of these self-righteous hypocrites. As he vows to slaughter every last one of them with his own hands, causing the knights to freeze in terror as a dark, forbidden energy surges from his broken body, and they realize in shock that Archimonde is somehow tapping into his necromancy even while dying. Berkel Reinlant cuts through the warning, refusing to let the necromancer drag this out any longer. Archimonde counters by reeling off the staggering death toll of 20 million plague victims, pointing out that he turned those lost souls into his own undying army, mocking the idea that Berkel Reinlant is driven by anything other than petty personal vendetta, and challenging the knight to deny that the people of his hometown were among the dead, forcing the warrior to pause while the weight of those lives hangs in the air, until Berkel Reinlant finally declares that he fights for only one single noble purpose, claiming his crusade is for the future of the next generation and their children, as he plunges his blade forward with a conviction that briefly paralyses the necromancer, leaving Archimonde to see his own corruption reflected in the steady, unflinching eyes of his enemy, and he realizes with a jolt how starkly different his path has been from this righteous knight, who stares back with the absolute certainty of a man defending his own descendants. Then Berkel Reinlant delivers the final, decisive strike, pushing the blade deeper while demanding to know if the monster has any last words, but the dying necromancer just smirks, knowing his kind does not fade away quite that simply, as the momentum of the battle shifts into a final, crushing blow and Berkel Reinlant watches as his opponent finally falls, while the surrounding coalition breaks into wild cheers, convinced that Archimonde is truly dead. Yet in his final moments, the necromancer hears the sound of his own head hitting the ground, marking the abrupt end of the 10-year war and the supposed death of the continent's greatest devil. Archimonde reflects on his supposed end, believing his time as the necromancer has finally passed, yet the storm clouds gather over the estate where his new life is about to begin, and the servants notice a sudden movement from the young lord in his crib, which catches their attention as the child tries to process his own physical state, so the caretakers approach the infant to check on his well-being, pointing out a portrait of the Duchess in the room to see if he recognizes his mother, while the baby struggles to form the word for mother despite his stiff, tiny body, pushing through the awkwardness of his new form to finally utter the first syllables, leaving the watching servant stunned by the toddler's unnatural ability to speak. But the child's mind is still trapped in his old habits, reflexively attempting to summon his dark legions, and he barks out a command that leaves the confused caretakers staring in disbelief at the empty air, until a massive time skip pushes the story forward by 15 years, where the local crowds gather to catch a glimpse of the young Lord Klein, marveling at his striking silver hair and the sharp features that set him apart. Clearly impressed by his refined, almost godlike appearance as he walks through the grounds, carrying the same cold intensity that hints at the memories of his past life, while the onlookers whisper among themselves about how dazzling and handsome he looks today, ignoring their stares as he remains focused on his own thoughts, until a sudden bucket of water splashes onto him from above, and he looks up to see a man shouting a protective incantation to ward off evil spirits. The priest identifies himself as Garrison Berkman, claiming he sees the face of Archimonde in Klein, while the servants nearby scatter in terror from the supposed spiritual corruption, and Klein wipes the water from his face, mocking the priest for wasting years on these baseless purification rituals. But Garrison insists that Archimonde's soul lingers within Klein and demands a ritual cleansing, so the priest sprays him again while shouting about the ghostly visage he perceives, leaving Klein to wonder if the man has completely lost his mind, as the exasperated noble turns to walk away from the delusional fanatic, and Garrison commands his men to seize the boy immediately, so Klein bolts across the courtyard while shouting that his name is Klein, not the demon they fear, reflecting on the absurdity of his new life after his original death, which he barely remembers, only knowing he woke up in this strange world, having accidentally recited a necromantic spell as an infant that got him locked in a monastery, where he first encountered the relentless Garrison who has been stalking him ever since, convinced that his duty is to purge the soul of Archimonde from the young lord, and the priest forces him to endure endless hours of chanting, followed by freezing baths infused with garlic to ward off his supposed evil, plus bizarre fire rituals where he is tied to a cross for cleansing. As these years of torture only solidified Garrison's twisted obsession, so 5 years later, Klein is finally trying to live a normal life despite the lingering trauma. Aaron, the personal maid, prays for a healthy future for the young lord, but Klein is currently suffering through another one of Garrison's endless religious lectures, and he loses his cool, swatting the air in a sudden burst of frustration which accidentally knocks a handmade hat right out of Aaron's grasp. Realizing instantly that he overreacted to her hard work and sincere effort, so Klein stoops down to retrieve the item the priest had actually commissioned, while Aaron watches him closely, still clearly rattled by his outburst, and Klein studies the party hat, clearly not thrilled about the prospect of wearing it, when Garrison suddenly appears, towering over them in the doorway, seeing the boy holding the hat and immediately weeping with genuine emotional pride. But Klein shuts that down fast, snapping the hat in half right in front of him, prompting Garrison to scream about the return of the evil spirit Archimand, just as Dunkel, the leader of the Red Chariot Knights, walks in to check the status of the rituals, noting that the rumors about Klein being possessed have persisted for over a decade, although Dunkel dismisses the Order's official concerns as being long since settled. While Garrison uses the moment to physically manhandle Klein under the guise of an inspection, and Klein mentally rages at how effortlessly the priest maintains his fake, friendly facade, watching as Dunkel ignores the tension to play his own high-level social games. Then the Knight Commander turns to leave after a brief hollow pleasantry, leaving Klein to stew in the lingering, dangerous question of what happens next. Garrison chirps about the next ritual being set for Friday, and he saunters off while Klein fumes in the room, frustrated enough to kick the furniture in pure, unadulterated rage, questioning how a supposed holy man can justify such brutal torture. While Aaron, noticing the physical strain, wonders if he truly has left his past as Archimand behind, but Klein snaps back that he hates even hearing that name, secretly terrified of what the church would do if they confirmed his identity. Recalling the 7 agonizing years he spent locked away under constant surveillance, and he grumbles about how this priest is likely an agent sent to break him, so Aaron explains that an agent is one of the Holy Order's strongest warriors, leaving Klein to process the gravity of that revelation, as he learns that nobody in the family dares to oppose an agent, because their raw power is enough to command absolute fear throughout the household. Even as the others try to brush off the threat with lighthearted banter, Klein pauses the conversation to ask exactly who holds the title of the strongest duke, which leads to the admission that the current 7th duke cannot compare to the legendary first, and Klein immediately rejects the idea that his own father holds that mantle, firmly asserting that the first duke remains the undisputed peak of their lineage, causing the attendant to fall silent under the weight of that historical fact. Before he finally acknowledges the young lord's clear preference for the ancient ancestor, Klein fixates on the portrait while questioning the stranger's strange fixation, and the man marvels at the 200 years that have passed since the Founder's era, leading Klein to fixate on that specific 2-century timeframe, as the internal realization hits that he is truly the reincarnated Necromancer Archimand, where the family lineage scrolls out before his eyes. Finally revealing the first Duke Berkel Rhineland in all his glory, and the crushing irony sets in that Klein is now the descendant of the very man who ended him, which triggers a flash of the past battle where Berkel struck the final blow, leaving the motive for his return to light to protect the legacy of the children. Yet the violent memories of that combat surge forward into the present, snapping Klein awake with a sharp intake of breath, and he sits on the edge of the bed gasping for air, cursing the nightmare that reminded him of his past life as the devil of the continent, where he recalls the near destruction of the world in his blind rage, followed by his ultimate defeat at the hands of the Knight Berkel Rhineland, which left him reborn 2 centuries later with every single memory perfectly preserved. So he struggles to reconcile his new identity with the body he now inhabits, just as the persistent Garrison Berkman interrupts to ask if he was dreaming of Archimand, forcing Klein to mask his internal panic and play the part of a confused young lord, while Aaron bursts in to reveal that she overheard him muttering secrets in his sleep. Klein frantically silences Aaron before she can spill more of his sleep-talking secrets, while Garrison Berkman coolly interrupts to report that the swordsmanship demonstration is starting soon, dropping the bombshell that Klein must undergo an intensive, extended purification ritual immediately. And Aaron struggles to keep quiet as the pressure of the situation hits them both, causing Klein to seethe internally at the priest's meddling as he gazes out at the grounds, where the mention of a public swordsmanship demonstration hangs in the air between them, confirming that the Duke has personally demanded Klein's attendance at the upcoming event, though Klein is clearly suspicious of his father's sudden interest in his social presence. Garrison Berkman tries to suppress Aaron's persistent demands for a simple token, but Klein insists on letting her keep the small item despite the butler's obvious disapproval, wondering aloud why his father would invite him to a display he usually avoids. So Garrison Berkman explains that the visiting collateral branches of the family are the reason, leaving Klein to process the implications of having his distant relatives suddenly swarming the estate. As the halls are immediately filled with obnoxious cousins loudly mocking his reputation, ridiculing his reclusive time at the monastery with cruel jokes about the name Archimand, and the laughter turns even nastier as they bait him with rumors of hidden curses, while the northern relatives gorge themselves on food, completely unfazed by the growing tension, yet the arrival of the western cousins brings a different kind of looming threat. As one particular woman watches Klein from the shadows with a sharp, calculating gaze, and the group grows impatient, openly questioning if the young lord is even listening to them. The cousins try to pull rank by claiming Klein belongs to their Rhineland branch, but the kid barely acknowledges their existence and calls out their pathetic posturing, noting coldly that he does not even remember the names of these bottom feeders, and he realizes the family legacy is rotting from the inside out. Meanwhile, a brutal training duel erupts on the floor between two other fighters. Dalton screams in frustration as Delane Reinlant completely dominates their sparring match, demanding that his opponent stop playing around and show his true strength, though Delane calmly deflects every wild strike while insisting the fight is finished, observing how the family puts all its fading hopes on this one golden child. As Delane Reinlant stands there looking like the perfect, untouchable heir to the house, proving that his sword mastery is the only thing keeping their reputation alive, and Dalton lunges forward again with a desperate heavy swing, Klein watches the movement closely while his eyes begin to glow with new insight, seeing how Delane effortlessly parries the incoming blow with a flick of his wrist. The speed of the counter leaves no opening for a recovery, which forces Dalton to scramble backward just to avoid being completely overwhelmed. Klein focuses on the rhythm of the battle, catching every subtle shift in energy, breaking down the intricate footwork and the precise timing of the launch, and Dalton realizes with mounting horror that his opponent is leagues above him, while Klein effortlessly deconstructs the secrets behind the legendary Reinlant technique. Delane Reinlant unleashes the meteor sword, crushing Dalton's defense with a single brutal strike. The match ends instantly, leaving Dalton defeated and gasping for air on the ground. Delane turns back to his fallen opponent, coldly reminding him that he was the one truly outmatched. The surrounding crowd whispers in awe, realizing they just witnessed a masterclass execution of a forbidden technique. Klein senses the underlying threat behind the display. Recognizing this is a calculated power move against the collateral branches. The massive hall goes quiet until Heinkel Reinlant, the family head, finally makes his presence known. Delane catches Klein nearby and immediately shifts into a friendly, casual demeanor, acting like the perfect, humble heir who just happens to be the strongest person in the room. Klein watches him play the part, noting how the family uses this display to maintain their grip, dismissing the collateral branch members as mere pests who are only here to beg for more funding. Heinkel Reinland approaches his son, clearly pleased that Delane has already mastered the family's signature technique. The 7th Duke of Reinland stands before them, commanding instant respect from everyone in the room, offering rare praise to Delane, who bows before his father as the center of attention. Heinkel sees Delane as his only remaining hope to preserve the family's fading glory. Onlookers confirm that Delane's mana output is truly on another level compared to his peers. Delane plays the modest student, though he knows exactly how much power he holds. Heinkel invokes the legacy of the first Duke, reminding his son of their duty to stay at the top of the empire, placing a firm hand on Delane's shoulder to drill those ironclad family principles into his mind. But then Heinkel turns his gaze toward Klein, shattering the moment of pride with a sudden, sharp focus. Klein feels the weight of that stare, realizing he has finally been pulled into the family's internal power struggle. Heinkel Reinlant reaches out and touches Klein, immediately sensing the complete absence of mana within him, stating his disappointment out loud while Klein plays the part of the disgraced, powerless son who apologizes for his lack of potential, effectively branding himself a worthless burden to the family. An attendant tries to intervene by citing Klein's time at the monastery as an excuse for his weakness, but the surrounding collateral branch members are already whispering, relishing the confirmation that the second son is useless. They openly mock the direct line for its incompetence. Confident that it is time for them to seize control, Klein walks away from the insults, though he mentally challenges the hypocrisy of his father's previous teachings, recalling Heinkel's past claims about children being the future. Yet looking at the current state of the Reinland household, he realizes the entire legacy is already rotting from within. A group of young nobles mocks him as he passes, clearly not fearing any retaliation from a powerless heir. Dalton Conwell steps forward to taunt Klein, questioning how a direct descendant can fail to wield even a basic sword, sneering at Klein's arrogance and calling him a total disgrace to the family name. Dalton tries to go lower by exposing Klein's rumored womanizing, thinking he's revealing a dark secret. Klein calmly reveals he knew about the payoffs all along, leaving Dalton flustered by his own stupidity. Dalton loses his composure and lunges at Klein in a blind rage. But Klein counters instantly, sending Dalton crashing face first into the floor with a single, precise move. Dalton scrambles to his feet, accusing Klein of taking out his frustration over Delane's success on him. Then he crosses the line by attacking Klein's status as an illegitimate brat who never knew his mother. And the air in the room turns freezing as Klein's expression shifts into something truly lethal, causing Dalton to realize too late that he just made a fatal mistake by pushing Klein too far. Klein finds the disdain for his mother's memory pathetic, considering the state the Reinlant house has fallen into. His eyes flare with a dark, intense power that signals a shift beyond simple human strength. An overwhelming aura consumes his surroundings as he questions why the hero's family would end up this way. Heinkel Reinlant steps into the hallway to intervene, ordering the confrontation between the two youths to cease immediately. He declares that no more disrespect toward the family will be tolerated under his watch. Dalton Conwell pulls away, gritting his teeth in frustration while nursing the sting of his earlier defeat, hurling one final insult at Klein. He calls him a coward for hiding behind his knight. Klein watches Dalton retreat in a pathetic display of bravado before turning his attention elsewhere. A firm grip tightens around the hilt of his weapon, signaling that the matter is far from settled. Klein looks toward Dunkel, his expression unreadable and focused. Calling Dunkel over, he asks for a spare sword to test something crucial. They head out into the desolate training grounds far from prying eyes. Dunkel hands over a blade, questioning why Klein needs to practice at such an odd hour. The request remains vague as they stand in the quiet expanse of the training field. Klein begins to mirror the technique Delane used earlier, testing the mechanics of the meteor sword. Dismissing Dunkel to maintain his cover, he insists he only needs a moment to check his progress. Dunkel retreats while worrying that Klein is still clinging to impossible dreams about the blade, watching from a distance. He concludes that a man without mana can never hope to achieve the status of a knight. Klein swings the sword with perfect form, effortlessly replicating the secret technique of the Duke. A vivid memory of the earlier demonstration flashes through his mind as he masters the movement with unnatural speed. Klein dissects every detail of the meteor sword, analyzing the footwork to ensure perfect execution. He refines the timing of the launch, treating the blade as an extension of his own will. Every nuance of the trajectory and the subtle flow of mana is etched into his mind. Purple energy crackles around his eyes as he begins to channel power he should not possess. A nearby servant senses the sudden, volatile surge of mana and gasps in pure disbelief. Realizing the source of this overwhelming pressure, he can only stare in horror at the training field. Klein unleashes a devastating strike, tearing through the air with a flash of raw, focused energy, focus radiating from his eyes. He maintains absolute control over the surging magical current. He stands amidst the swirling remnants of the spell, his presence demanding total obedience. The sheer force of his technique shatters the surrounding stone, leaving the onlookers completely paralyzed. Dunkel finally approaches, his voice trembling as he calls out to his young master. Klein brushes off the exhaustion, marveling at the fact that his experimental technique actually functioned. Onlookers watch in confusion, struggling to comprehend how someone without mana achieved such a feat. Dalton observes the aftermath, his confidence shaken by the display of power he just witnessed. Reality sets in as he realizes his previous assumptions about Klein were entirely wrong. The guards joke about the intense purification ritual. Unaware that Klein's training was the true source of the anomaly, Klein shakes off the physical toll, wiping the sweat from his brow while the others remain oblivious. He dismisses their trivial conversation, fully aware that he has just cleared a massive hurdle. The tension shifts as Klein is approached by a messenger bearing a new, unexpected development. The servant delivers an invitation from Lord Dalton, setting the stage for their inevitable confrontation. Klein processes the news about Lord Dalton wanting to offer a formal apology. His mind immediately races back to their previous clash. Wondering why that guy would ever cave so easily, examining the invitation letter closely, the contents reveal it is actually a formal hunting contest. The timing seems way too convenient to be an innocent peace offering. Suspicion takes over as Klein realizes Dalton is likely just trying to lure him into a trap. Dunkel asks if he intends to accept, but Klein sees no real way to turn it down. Looking toward the sword resting in the room, he feels a surge of confidence. That blade represents the power he now possesses. Remembering his recent breakthrough, he recalls how easily he pushed his limits during training. The ability to perfectly mimic any technique after seeing it once is his ultimate trump card. Power crackles in his memory as he visualizes the destructive force he can now command. Dunkel watches him in silence, accepting his master's quiet resolve. The carriage is prepared for the journey while Klein contemplates the bizarre nature of this hunting contest. Suddenly, someone else demands to join, but Klein is far from welcoming. The intruder insists on tagging along, leaving Klein completely bewildered. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure observes the situation from afar. A dark premonition settles over him, sensing that something is fundamentally wrong today. Their carriage rolls out toward the hunting grounds, the wheels grinding against the forest road. Inside the carriage, the atmosphere turns grim as one of the passengers suddenly falls ill. Someone tries to hand over a pillow to ease the discomfort, but the situation is rapidly spiraling out of control. Klein warns that the western forest is too rugged for anyone unprepared, then tells his companion that getting some sleep will help with the pain. His attendant jokes about his unexpected kindness, only for Klein to dryly clarify the pillow was meant for Aaron. The carriage rattles as they travel toward their destination. Peering outside, Klein notes how drastically the landscape has transformed over time. Remembering the field as a frozen graveyard of corpses, he marvels at how lush the greenery has become. He stares intently at the terrain, suspecting that Burkle is responsible for this unnatural ecological shift. A guard interrupts his thoughts to announce their arrival. The carriage pulls into the massive, ornate gates of the Conwell estate. Klein surveys the lavish architecture. Unimpressed by the sheer scale of the compound, the estate outshines even the main Rhineland residence. Observers note that spending this much wealth on a children's hunting contest is a sign of reckless excess. A voice calls out to Klein. Dalton approaches with a menacing hound on a leash, mocking Klein for staring at the scenery. He boasts about the estate's design, claiming the excess capital came from outside Klein's direct influence. Mocking Klein's 7 years of isolation in a monastery, Dalton questions how someone so sheltered could understand the world. Klein ignores the insult and points out that the hounds are clearly emaciated. Dalton dismisses the concern and laughs off Klein's impatience. He tosses something toward Klein, ordering him to watch closely as the contest begins. Dalton unleashes his pack of emaciated hounds, declaring the hunt officially underway. Meat bait is scattered across the hillside to draw the starving animals into a frenzy. Sensing the scent, the hounds tear into the trail with desperate, heightened intensity. Dalton aims his bow, savoring the cruel spectacle he has orchestrated for Klein. Arrows strike home as the dogs collapse under the sudden, brutal assault. Chaos erupts across the field while the pack falls to Dalton's sadistic target practice. Mocking the carnage, Dalton laughs at the efficiency of his twisted game. A young maid approaches, but her presence immediately draws the attention of the hunters. Leering at the newcomer, Dalton identifies her as Klein's personal servant. He insults her size and stature before reaching out to grab her. The maid freezes as Dalton's hand clamps firmly onto her arm. Klein intervenes. His voice cold as he demands Dalton release her, moving faster than thought. Klein crushes Dalton's hand with overwhelming force. Dalton recoils in agony, his hand mangled from the sudden precise counterattack. Clutching his injury, Dalton tries to bluster, but his composure is completely shattered. He scrambles toward his horse, desperate to put distance between himself and Klein. Mounting his steed, Dalton shouts a challenge, taunting Klein to follow him into the wilds. Riding off, Dalton warns his men not to pursue as the terrain ahead turns lethal. Klein remains behind, holding a mysterious signal scroll he retrieved during the confrontation. Identified as a magic signal scroll, the paper is designed to alert nearby allies the moment it is torn. Klein's men watch the trail, suspicious that the priest trailing them might be a scout for an ambush. Confirming their fears, Klein reveals the magic scroll linked to his own hand crest. He commands his men to stand by, then mounts his horse to hunt Dalton down deep in the darkening forest. The silence hangs heavy and oppressive, shadows stretch across the path as the sun vanishes entirely. Confident Dalton has not traveled far, Klein pushes his mount forward along the narrow trail. A sudden, sharp realization hits Klein as he senses an unnatural presence nearby. Calling out his name, a rival appears from the darkness with blade drawn. Klein dismounts. Confused by the strange display of a riderless horse and discarded gear peering through the gloom, he tries to process the scene unfolding before him. The realization sinks in that the trap has already been sprung. Stalking forward, the rival sneers that the hunt reaches its climax right here, declaring Klein the final prey. The swordsman levels his blade for the kill. Mocking the Rhineland name, the rival promises to present Klein's head to Delane as a trophy. The attacker rants about the pathetic state of the Rhineland family, calling Klein an empty shell. Swinging his sword, the rival boasts that Klein will not even have a chance to struggle. Hidden archers emerge from the brush as the rival claims the dukedom for his own branch. Listening to the insults, Klein keeps his eyes locked on the approaching threat. The rival cackles about spreading the news of the fallen swordsman family of the north. Envisioning the gruesome end, he laughs that the young master will be nothing more than dog food. Klein scoffs at the insults, muttering that this is for the sake of the children's future. His lip curls into a sharp, dismissive grin, then an uncontrollable burst of laughter echoes across the clearing as Klein loses his composure. The rival recoils in genuine confusion, demanding to know if Klein has finally snapped. Trailing off, Klein drops his hand and his expression shifts to something far more dangerous, declaring that a brat like the rival does not know his place. Klein's eyes ignite with an unnatural crimson glow. A sudden, chilling shift in the air forces the rival to stumble back. Klein hisses that the Rhineland family was built on the price of his own death. Shadows begin to coil around him, pulsing with an oppressive weight. The rival gasps, mistaking the phenomenon for magic, but Klein corrects him instantly, claiming the power is actually pure demonic energy. Onlookers scramble in terror as the atmosphere warps around Klein. The rival stares in disbelief, trying to process the mention of demonic power, calling upon ancient souls buried in the depths of time. Klein prepares to unleash them. Rising into the air, he commands the entities to emerge into the light. Green flames erupt as spectral skulls manifest to feed and devour the surroundings. Realizing the true identity of the power, the rival shrieks in absolute horror, screaming the name Archimand. He watches as skeletal warriors tear through the brush. Klein grins, ordering his summoned army to devour every single one of their enemies, admitting he nearly forgot the taste of this ancient, destructive command. 2 centuries have passed since these ancient warriors last saw the light of day. Their presence feels like a distant, faded memory haunting the edge of existence. Yet the connection remains, vibrating through the void and calling back to him. Those restless spirits of the dead reach out from the shadows of history. Every pulse and trace of that long-forgotten power floods back into his veins, relishing the dark energy. He clenches his hand as the familiar sensation takes root. The rival watches in pure disbelief, unable to reconcile the legend with the man standing before him. Shrieking the name Archimand, he watches the skeletal horde surround Klein in a suffocating circle, confirming the terrifying truth. Klein admits that name once belonged to him. The rival's men tremble, questioning if the stories about Archimand were nothing more than myths. Klein remains unfazed by their confusion, waiting for them to grasp the reality of the threat. One of the spectral skeletons looms forward, its empty sockets burning with a cold, malevolent light. Silence hangs heavy over the battlefield as the soldiers realize their mistake. The enemy commanders break into manic laughter, dismissing the skeletal legion as mere low-level cannon fodder. Mocking the summon, they label the army as literal trash. Klein catches the insult, his expression darkening as he processes their arrogance. The rival commander boasts about how easily he dismantles such skeletons on routine missions, planning to claim the skulls as souvenirs. The soldiers ready their weapons to clear the path. Reinforcements draw their bows, preparing to unleash a volley to shatter the perceived weak defense. Archers receive the order to load, unaware that they are marking their own graves. The archers release the volley, expecting a quick end to the fight. Arrows scream through the air toward the stationary skeletal legion. A massive cloud of projectiles descends, blotting out the light. Klein stands completely still as the iron rain closes in. His eyes sharpen, tracking every single point of impact. Every arrow strikes an invisible barrier, clattering harmlessly to the ground. The enemy commander smugly assumes the target is already dead. Realization hits the commander when the dust settles. Sizzling energy dissipates from the defensive wards surrounding the army. Skeletal warriors emerge from the mist, their gear gleaming with ancient power. Klein notes that 2 centuries have clearly dulled the world's memory of his troops. The enemy forces panic, unable to comprehend how a shield suddenly manifested. Klein taunts them, explaining that his skeletons are far beyond standard Graveborn fodder. He clarifies that these soldiers were forged to be different. Directing Burkle to watch, Klein shifts his legion into a tactical formation. His voice drips with disdain for those who mock the legacy of the North. Clenching his fist, Klein vows to crush the invaders personally. The skeletal legion breaks into a terrifying high-speed sprint. The enemy commander loses his composure as his line gets overrun. Disbelief fills the battlefield because these undead are not just standing, they are hunting. The enemy commander screams to maintain formation, but his front line crumbles instantly. Blood sprays as a soldier takes a clean strike through his armor. The skeletal legion tears through the ranks with lethal efficiency. Realization dawns on the commander that their strategy is falling apart. He desperately shouts orders for the second crossbow unit to surround the threat. Shadows shift as skeletal archers lock onto their new targets. Iron bolts are drawn back, locking into place with ominous precision. Seeing the incoming projectiles, the infantry panics and scatters for cover. Klein gives the command to fire, sealing the fate of the remaining frontline. A volley of heavy bolts streaks through the air. The projectiles find their marks, cutting down the soldiers before they can retreat. Silhouettes of the dying drop one by one against the darkened sky. Skeletal hunters close the distance, overwhelming the survivors in the chaos. The enemy commander breaks under the pressure, unable to process the tactical nightmare. He screams for his men to drop the crossbows and engage in close combat. His orders are ignored as the chaos spirals further out of his control. A twisted grin spreads across his face as he prepares a desperate final strike. Cursing the undead army, he lunges forward with his blade drawn. He manages to shatter a skeletal skull in a moment of pure adrenaline. Triumph flashes in his eyes, but his victory is short-lived as the onslaught continues. Klein watches as the enemy commander realizes his desperate strike against the skeleton failed. The commander stammers about severing the head, but Klein corrects him with a cold observation, warning that his undead servants operate on entirely different rules. The headless skeleton simply stands back up, retrieving its own skull from the dirt. Glowing energy pulses within the hollow eye sockets, signaling a forced reanimation. Nerves and bone knit back together instantly as the creature repairs itself. Witnessing the impossible feat, the commander stares in absolute disbelief. A screeching sound fills the air as the skeleton locks its gaze onto him. Klein reveals that his legion does not just fight, they utilize complex tactical formations. Breaking under the psychological weight, the soldiers scream as the undead swarm them. Klein notes that his current limit for this body is 11, but that is more than enough, inviting the remnants of the enemy force to keep fighting for their lives. Terror grips the survivors as they realize there is no escaping this nightmare. Meanwhile, far from the battlefield, a man recounts tales of the young master at a monastery. His companion finds the stories of Klein's antics genuinely hilarious. The narrator notes her obvious affection, teasing her for being so fond of him. Erin flushes with embarrassment, unable to hide her true feelings. She insists that no one could possibly comprehend just how incredible Klein truly is. Back on the front, the commander begs for mercy as his hope finally evaporates. Klein shows no room for hesitation, ordering his skeleton to finish the slaughter immediately. Erin keeps gushing about Klein's kindness. Completely oblivious to the carnage Klein is currently orchestrating on the battlefield, the enemy soldiers fall one by one as the skeletons carve through their lines. Dalton Conwell struggles to parry a strike, but his defense crumbles under the relentless pressure of the undead. Realizing the regeneration is the true problem, Dalton Conwell curses their endless resilience while desperation sets in, deciding that taking out the controller is his only remaining option. He pushes past the grunts to find an opening, charging straight at Klein with a final, desperate roar. Swearing to end this twisted display of necromancy for good, Dalton Conwell swings his blade with everything he has left, but Klein watches the movement with chilling, focused intensity, gathering magical energy into his own weapon. He recalls the specific mechanics of a high-level technique, instantly recognizing it as the Rhineland family's secret art. Klein unleashes the meteor sword. And Dalton Conwell stands frozen as the strike lands true. Klein declares that mercy is off the table for this encounter, leaving Dalton Conwell broken on the field as his judgment reaches its conclusion. The fundamental weakness of a necromancer is the death of the caster, and Klein reflects on the irony that Archiman fell to that very limitation despite commanding demonic energy to fuel his dark reach. The Rhineland family's own technique was what ultimately shielded Klein from defeat. As he absorbs the strength gained from his fallen opponent, realizing that his current vessel demands a new sense of responsibility, Burkle struggles to comprehend Klein's cryptic declaration. His confusion deepening as he stares up from the ground, Klein taps his foot near the defeated man, promising a complete reconstruction of the fallen house. Dalton awakens in a pitch-black void, disoriented and unable to see anything in the oppressive darkness. He feels his limbs restrained by heavy metallic shackles, and the realization of his capture begins to set in. Klein steps out of the shadows to greet his captive, identifying this space as a personal afterlife crafted by Archiman himself. Dalton attempts to process the impossible nature of his surroundings. Klein recalls the cruel way Dalton treated his own hunting hounds, reminding him of the sadistic pleasure he took in his past abuses. Dalton lashes out in a desperate, frantic denial of the truth. Dalton struggles to comprehend how he is still alive, recalling the lethal strike from Klein's sword that should have ended him, and realizing his body remains completely untouched by the blade. Klein clarifies that he is already dead and this space is merely returning his own karma. Dalton screams in denial, demanding to be released from this supposed afterlife delusion. Ignoring his protests, Klein manifests a pack of spectral, glowing-eyed hounds. The sudden appearance of the vicious beasts visibly breaks Dalton's resolve. Klein commands him to listen to the sounds of the lives he ruthlessly extinguished, and the spectral pack begins to circle and maul the defenseless captive. Dalton collapses under the onslaught, reliving the agony of his own past victims. Klein watches coldly as the man realizes this torment is the hell he built himself. Screams of pure desperation echo through the void as the spectral assault intensifies. Begging for mercy, Dalton finally experiences the crushing weight of his own cruelty. Tears and pain blur his vision as his spirit begins to fracture. The broken man lies defeated, drained of all his former arrogance. Klein stands over him, his calm demeanor unmoved by the suffering below, observing the final collapse of his enemy's psyche. A legion of skeletal servants materializes behind Klein, awaiting his next command. Klein acknowledges the service of his dark army, offering a reward for their loyalty, and he shatters the ancient curse binding the spirits to grant them their long-awaited freedom. Shimmering remnants of the released spirits drift into the night air. Klein watches the energy fade while reflecting on the nature of his own revival. His quiet contemplation is broken by a sudden, unexpected voice from the shadows. Scattered bones on the ground begin to stir as the stranger questions his own purpose. The mysterious figure reveals he has been watching the young master all along. Klein turns to face the intruder, demanding to know his true identity. A hooded man dismisses the question and immediately unleashes a surge of green spectral energy. Emerald flames erupt across the battlefield, consuming the remains of the fallen soldiers. Necrotic power forces life back into the corpses, warping their bodies with dark magic. Klein recognizes the forbidden technique as the stolen power of soul return. The reanimated soldiers rise as mindless puppets under the hooded man's absolute command. Realizing the true nature of this intruder's craft, Klein identifies him as a rival necromancer. The hooded man laughs off the discovery, claiming these puppets are more useful than Dalton ever was. Echoes of that twisted laughter carry across the distant, darkened mountains. Meanwhile, a frantic messenger interrupts Dunkel to share rumors about the young master's past. The knight brushes off the gossip, choosing to focus on the urgent situation at hand. A glowing signal scroll appears in his hand, meant only for critical emergencies. 3 hours have passed since Dalton's departure, and the lack of news breeds growing unease. Dunkel decides to abandon his post and search for the missing group. His subordinates attempt to stop him, reminding the knight that the hunting competition is still underway. The knight commander stares down the guards, his eyes narrowing as he recognizes their insignia, identifying the Corwell family crest on their armor. He confirms his suspicions about Dalton's men, asserting his authority as Rhineland's commander. He warns them to step aside or face the consequences. Demanding they understand the gravity of his ultimatum, he cuts through their flimsy excuses. The guards hesitate under his intense gaze. Clearly caught off guard by his sudden intervention, turning his attention to Aaron, he orders her to return to the estate with the priest immediately. She watches him in silence, sensing the urgency behind his command to leave the scene. Realizing the priest has already vanished, the guard mentions the man's grim expression before he departed. Remembering the priest's warning about a bad feeling, the commander realizes he was being followed. Cursing his own delay, he surges forward into a run, desperate to catch up, tearing open the mysterious scroll he carried. The realization hits that this was no accident. Sprinting toward the destination, he knows something catastrophic is happening to the young master far off in the distance. A massive horde of undead puppets advances under a dark shroud. Klein realizes his demonic energy is completely depleted after the last fight, leaving him powerless, struggling to maintain his focus. He grinds his teeth as the reality of his situation sinks in. Aware that his current vessel is crumbling, he knows this body will not last much longer. The hooded necromancer points toward Klein, ordering his mindless puppets to eliminate the young master. Watching the horde close in, Klein realizes the irony of being targeted by his own dark craft. Clenching his fist as a faint seal of power flickers, he prepares for a final desperate stand. The undead soldiers lunge forward with rusted blades, eager to tear him apart in the dark. Klein mocks the necromancer, clearly baiting him into a trap. The hooded figure realizes his mistake only when it is too late. A blinding pillar of golden light erupts from the sky, tearing through the undead horde like a hot blade through wax. Garrison Birkman steps into the fray, his presence radiating an overwhelming holy aura, reciting a prayer for the dead. He commands the light to incinerate the puppets. Klein watches as the soldier effortlessly clears the battlefield. The necromancer recognizes the intruder, his confidence shattering into pure terror. Garrison identifies himself as a Holy Order agent, here to reclaim the field. The Church's elite agents are revealed as the Pope's ultimate human weapons. These warriors are the only ones capable of wielding St. Gaul's holy relic. Each agent holds the destructive power of an entire fortress within them. The necromancer tries to retreat, but the pressure of the light pins him down. Holy energy shreds his remaining defenses, forcing him to scramble away. Garrison notes that the necromancer is finally facing a true monster. Klein remains the ultimate benchmark for raw strength in the agent's eyes. The commander declares that Klein can finally rest now that he has arrived. The remaining undead puppets shudder, losing their connection to their master. Garrison dispatches the last of the frontline guards with a single brutal movement. The necromancer is left completely exposed as his army falls to the holy onslaught. The Rhineland Knight commander slams a holy relic into the necromancer's face, commanding the sinners to finally face their inevitable reckoning. While his eyes glow with a cold, divine intensity that brooks no resistance, promising a baptism of fire to burn away every ounce of corruption, as he begins the ritual cleansing of the remaining undead horrors, tearing through the ranks with strikes so fast they defy human perception, obliterating the creatures one by one until nothing but dust remains, and declaring that this total annihilation is the only form of mercy allowed. The nearby remnants of the enemy army watch in absolute, paralyzing disbelief, questioning how a church agent possesses such overwhelming, world-shaking combat power. Realizing the entire tactical situation has shifted beyond their worst nightmares, the lead necromancer bolts away in a desperate attempt to escape his fate, casting aside his ceremonial mask just to move faster across the field. But the Rhineland Knight commander is already standing directly behind him, grabbing the necromancer by the head and halting his retreat with an iron grip, telling the trembling man that his final prayer has yet to be finished, so he should remain grateful for the divine end currently being delivered, before the commander invokes the name of the light to seal the execution, striking the final blow that separates the necromancer's head from his body, and ending the threat of the undead army with one decisive, brutal stroke. Klein watches the Rhineland Knight commander, his mind racing to process the sheer dominance, noting how the man simply stepped forward and decimated the surrounding forces with ease, realizing that the commander's aura alone is heavy enough to crush everything nearby, and 20 bodies were shredded instantly just by the intensity of that power, while the commander's blood-slicked hand reaches out to address the immediate aftermath. Claiming he sensed the necromancy and arrived at the exact moment things turned, though he pauses with a grin, noting that something about this energy feels off, and Klein stares at the man's gore-stained hand while the realization hits him hard, watching as the commander scrutinizes the lingering traces of the dark magic involved. Concluding that the source of this power does not align with the corpse at their feet, and Klein freezes, fully aware that one wrong move could cost him his life. Just as Dunkel gallops into the scene on his horse to check the situation, calling out to see if Klein is still holding up after the brutal encounter, so Klein shifts his focus to his ally, his nerves still frayed from the interaction, feeling the backlash of his own necromancy as blood trickles down his face, and Dunkel reaches him, his voice filled with concern for the young master's condition as the commander walks away, leaving them to deal with the carnage left behind. While Dunkel demands to know why the field is covered in blood and gore, but Klein is too exhausted to explain, merely asking after the status of Dalton, then drops the bombshell that he killed him, closing the chapter on his rival. Klein justifies the kill as a simple act of self-preservation, leaving the explosive news to land hard on his gathered audience, and Delkin Conwell erupts, demanding to know if Dalton really targeted the young master, shouting that his son was a man of honor who would never stoop to assassination. So a mediator redirects the focus, insisting they address the crime immediately, noting that Klein has held his ground through every interrogation without breaking, then reveals proof that 2 mercenaries from the Conwell estate vanished alongside them, forcing Delkin to realize his own men failed to cover their tracks, though the surrounding lords remain skeptical, questioning how a monoless boy killed a knight. Whispering about Klein's lack of talent and his history of failing demonstrations, while Delkin hides his panic, fearing he will be exposed if the truth surfaces, deciding he must pivot his strategy before he loses everything, and he reminds the room of the bizarre rumors surrounding Klein's birth and his claims to divinity, challenging anyone to believe that a fake could be a cold-blooded killer, screaming that Klein is nothing but a talentless fraud trying to shift the blame. Until a sudden, sharp interruption cuts through his tirade, and Klein walks into the light, having heard every word of the accusation, confirming he killed the mercenaries in self-defense after they were turned into undead by Garrison, which sends Delkin into a frenzy, screaming that the boy is a liar, while Klein just smirks, doubling down on the truth of his divine heritage. Delkin realizes his influence is crumbling, so he vows to restore his family standing through blood. And his eyes burn with a cold, desperate intensity that says he will eliminate any threat. But the tension in the room is shattered by a sudden, rhythmic knocking at the heavy doors, and the grand entrance swings open to reveal a figure of absolute authority, announcing the arrival of Leia, commander of the Blue Holy Spear Knights, which immediately throws the room into confusion, especially for Klein, who wonders why she's here. While the council members scramble to question her presence at this private inquiry, until Klein's father steps in, explaining that Dalton operated under her specific order, so Leia has every legal right to be present for these proceedings, and her piercing gaze scans the room until it locks onto a single target, when she makes direct eye contact with Klein and requests a private word, which leaves the young man completely baffled by the sudden, intense interest. But his father grants the request, allowing them a brief moment away from the crowd, and Klein reluctantly follows her, unsure if this is a blessing or a trap, while he silently complains about the rigid, unpredictable nature of these high-ranking knights. Then he pauses, realizing this unexpected invitation might actually be a hidden opportunity, because someone of her stature only initiates a private meeting for verification, suspicion, or a test. So he accepts the challenge, deciding he is ready to face whatever she has planned, and the pair exits the hall together, leaving the murmuring lords behind them as Klein concludes that he will turn this encounter to his own advantage no matter the cost. Leia stops in her tracks, the sound of her boots echoing in the quiet corridor, and she turns to face him with a lingering, unreadable silence before suddenly closing the distance between them. Then she reaches out, casually asking if she can touch him, which leaves Klein internally spiraling, wondering if she has finally lost her mind. Because Leia Ren Paulwyvern is no ordinary noble but a legendary captain and master of the spear, whose combat record includes brutal solo campaigns against high-tier monster hordes, and she's known for cutting down entire groups of beasts without a second thought, with a precision that turns the battlefield into a graveyard of monsters. where she systematically dismantles every threat in her path during the Western subjugation operation, when she tore through the frontline defenses to ensure the safety of the civilians, proving her reputation as a one-woman army is entirely well-earned. And her cold, calculated efficiency makes her a terrifying ally to have, but she snaps him back to reality, demanding he keep up with her pace, so Klein maintains a professional distance, reminding himself that they are not actually family. Despite what Heinkel claimed about their supposed cousin connection, since Leia is the daughter of the first wife, leaving them as biological strangers, then she brushes off his hesitation, claiming her request was just personal curiosity, yet she grabs him anyway, leaving Klein completely caught off guard by her forwardness. Leia makes an unexpected request to touch him, leaving Klein completely bewildered about where this sudden intimacy is coming from. Before she grabs his hand to inspect it closely, noting that his skin is unnaturally soft without a single scar or callus, which forces Klein to realize she's actually analyzing his combat history through his palms, while she presses into his skin to check for the specific muscle where that master swordsmen never lack. Then Leia confronts him with the reality that his hands have never held a blade. Questioning how someone with such pristine skin could have possibly survived duels with mercenaries like Dalton, and she narrows her eyes, clearly suspecting he is hiding a different kind of power, so she pulls away, casting doubt on everything he has claimed so far while Klein calls her out, wondering if she thinks he is actually Lord Archimond, yet he inwardly admits that this woman is far more dangerous than she lets on. Because Leia refuses to accept his silence and is actively fishing for a confession, so Klein decides the best strategy is to outbluff her and play the confident card, and he laughs off the idea of being the legendary figure, but Leia immediately shuts him down, dismissing his act as nothing more than a childish facade, after she insults him by calling him a mere brat to his face, which leaves Klein genuinely shaken by her blatant disrespect. And he demands she repeat herself, struggling to keep his composure, so Leia doubles down, ruthlessly tearing into his lack of presence, voice, and stature. Leia keeps pushing, insisting that even if Klein managed to beat a knight, his lack of swordsmanship is painfully obvious, and she throws him for a loop by offering a kiss if he can actually prove his worth, while Klein just stares at her, completely processing the absurdity of the situation. And he wonders why he would ever want such a thing, clearly reeling from her biting words, so he questions if this is some weird political ploy, but Leia just walks away and tells him they are already late, and she adds that the real Archimond would never stoop to such levels, which leaves Klein stewing in silence as they finally head toward the entrance. Then the duo officially makes their grand appearance before the gathered assembly. And Klein internally admits his own naivety while he reflects on his 7 years as the useless second son, acknowledging that nobody would ever believe he actually killed Dalton in self-defense. But then Delkin Conwell interrupts his thoughts, asking exactly what the two of them were discussing, so Leia tries to deflect while Klein grips his weapon with a sudden, sharp resolve, and he draws his sword in one fluid motion, cutting through the heavy tension in the room, which forces the onlookers to snap to attention as the cold steel catches the light. And even Delkin Conwell pauses, realizing he is staring down the sharp end of the blade, so Klein declares he will prove his identity himself and tells them to stop wasting time with Northern customs. And he throws down the ultimate challenge, demanding a formal trial by combat, which leaves the entire assembly reeling from the sudden escalation. As the tradition of the trial by combat dictates that the victor's word becomes the final, undisputed verdict, so Delkin Conwell asks why he would choose such a desperate path, but Klein just tells him there are plenty of reasons. Klein calls out the false accusations regarding his lineage and rejects the insults thrown at his mother, confirming his identity as Archimond while mentally distancing himself from his second life's maternal ties, and he forces the hesitant official to stop stalling and finalize the terms of his challenge immediately, which stirs the crowd as they gossip about the rare revival of the ancient trial by combat tradition. Then the 7th Duke intervenes to formalize the request, declaring that the duel's outcome will serve as the final verdict, and the official realizes with a jolt that this ruling renders all previous evidence against Klein null and void, while Delkin Conwell sees an opening to finish Klein off and mockingly questions how he plans to fight without mana, but he quickly shifts his strategy, deciding to send his own champion to slaughter the boy in his stead. And Klein remains unfazed, coldly promising that he will dismantle whoever Delkin Conwell sends to the arena, so the duel is officially set for 4 days from now, marking the true beginning of Klein's path to power as he privately resolves to use Delkin Conwell as the perfect stepping stone to dominate the rival branch families, and he envisions tearing down the current structure to rebuild the Rhineland legacy from the ground up. But his plans face immediate resistance as the reality of the danger starts to set in. For the family members are horrified by his decision, screaming that a trial by combat is a literal death sentence, and Klein dismisses their frantic panic, tired of explaining his choices to people who cannot see the bigger picture while his brother struggles to comprehend his father's sudden shift in attitude toward the challenge. Then his brother pleads to take the fight in his place, citing the existence of a system-backed champion, but Klein shuts him down, asserting that the Rhineland family must be ruled by the strength of the true successor. And he demands his brother show some backbone, questioning why he would want to hide behind someone else, because he knows that allowing a proxy fight would only give the branch families a legal opening to kill the heir. Klein acknowledges the frustration of his brother, Delane, but refuses to back down on his path. Despite Delane's emotional plea to keep the heir position secure and avoid this dangerous gamble, Klein recalls the day he first held his newborn brother in his arms, Remembering the innocence he saw in that fragile infant, a memory so vivid that he felt like he was looking at an angel. Yet he now realizes how much time has slipped away while he was lost to the Holy Order. The emotional weight of the moment hits them both when Delane suddenly grabs him, and Klein is completely thrown off guard by the sight of his brother's tears. An unexpected intrusion breaks the heavy silence as a servant enters the room. Reporting that Count Conwell has officially selected his champion for the upcoming trial, Klein immediately demands to know the identity of the man who will face him. The servant names Randall, an excommunicated knight known for his terrifying reputation, and the gravity of this reveal hangs in the air as they realize the danger. The reason behind Randall's exile is a dark, uncontrollable thirst for bloodshed, showing a man who drowns his violent impulses in constant, heavy drinking. Brutal killer who leaves nothing but carnage behind him in his wake, Randall consumes his drink like a wild beast, clearly unhinged and ready for slaughter. He sneers at the prospect of hunting a young Rhineland lord for his next kill. Klein listens to the description, his resolve hardening as he gauges this lethal threat, and he reaches for his blade, knowing that the time for words has come to an end. Klein receives a specially prepared blade designed to shatter upon contact with mana. He inspects the weapon closely, knowing this piece of gear is his only edge. Feeling satisfied with the preparation, Klein signals that it is time to move. Stepping out toward the arena, he carries the sword with a calm, focused intensity. The spectators erupt in murmurs as Klein makes his unexpected appearance on the platform. Noble onlookers mock his decision to fight personally, finding the whole spectacle hilarious. They openly doubt his survival, citing Randall's legendary status as an elite Imperial warrior. Wondering why someone like Delane wasn't sent instead of a youth with 0 mana, Klein scans the perimeter of the dueling ground, searching for his dangerous opponent. His focus sharpens as he realizes Randall is nowhere to be seen in the ring. A massive, dark presence suddenly looms over him, forcing Klein to react instinctively. Randall leaps from the heights of the arena wall, crashing down with incredible force, towering over the youth. Randall introduces himself with a terrifying, blood-soaked grin. Klein stares back at the giant, his expression hardening as he sizes up the brute. Randall mocks his frail physique, reaching out to grip Klein with a massive hand. Klein dodges the grab with surprising speed, leaping backward to put distance between them. The audience watches in disbelief, questioning if the young lord just fled in panic. Onlookers critique the movement as clumsy, assuming the fight is already effectively over. Randall chuckles to himself, convinced that his prey is trembling in pure terror, but Klein merely brushes off his clothes, completely unfazed by the initial jump scare. Klein recalls a past trauma of a shoulder grab, causing him to instinctively flinch from the memory. Meanwhile, a separate conversation focuses on an incompetent figure who is useless until the very end. The woman observing this display remains silent, clearly deep in her own thoughts. She rejects a warning about Lady Hellion's impending anger, declaring the woman is not her mother. A taunting challenge echoes in her mind, promising a kiss if the knight is defeated. Klein turns his attention back to the ring, needing to confirm his own suspicions. He tries to cover his internal tension with a casual excuse about a stiff neck, but Randall suddenly clamps a massive hand down onto Klein's shoulder with a heavy thud. Klein snaps back, warning the perverted giant to keep his hands off him. He mocks Randall, suggesting that the Empire only abandoned the brute because of his thick head. Randall lets the insult slide with a sinister grin, noting the filthier the mouth, the louder the scream. He follows through on the threat, tightening his grip as he prepares to crush Klein. Klein manages to counter the hold, catching the giant's massive fist with his own grip. The force of the collision sends a shockwave through the arena, kicking up a massive cloud of dust. Randall is sent flying backward, his body slamming into the ground with enough force to crater the earth. The giant looks up in genuine confusion, struggling to process the sudden reversal of fortune. He stares at his own hand, realizing his grip was broken with terrifying ease. Spectators in the stands erupt in chaos, pointing at the shattered ground in total disbelief. The onlookers realize Klein has vanished from his original spot, moving too fast for the eye to track. Klein stands perfectly composed, looking down at his opponent as the dust begins to settle. Klein notes the giant's nasty personality and realizes a direct clash is off the table. Knowing any attempt to parry would shatter his own bones, he decides to play it careful. Spectators in the stands whisper about Klein's survival chances, doubting his fragile frame can withstand a graze. One onlooker watches in growing dread, convinced Klein is just walking toward his own deathbed. Klein remembers the warnings about the trial by combat, knowing he cannot simply abandon the family's future. Randall launches a savage overhead slash, forcing Klein to narrowly evade the heavy blade. Steel rings out as Klein unsheathes his weapon to meet the incoming pressure. The giant's massive strike slices through the air, barely missing Klein as he pivots. Randall attempts to grab his opponent mid-swing, but the maneuver fails to find its mark. Klein slides across the stone floor, kicking up a spray of debris to keep his distance. The giant bellows a warning, his massive arm swinging down with enough force to crater the platform. Sparks fly as Randall mocks Klein's defensive style, demanding he stop retreating and face him. Taunting the youth, Randall demands to know why he is not using his forbidden necromancy. The giant screams for Klein to show his true power as the Great Archimond. Klein's pupils dilate as the realization hits him that his secret identity is no longer hidden. A faint, knowing smirk creeps across his face, signaling that the games are officially over. Dark energy begins to bleed from his aura as he contemplates ending the entire match. Randall feels the sudden shift in the atmosphere, his expression twisting into one of pure terror. The giant stumbles back, realizing he has awakened something far deadlier than a simple swordsman. Onlookers watch in confused silence as the hunter suddenly becomes the prey, paralyzed by the change in Klein. Randall is visibly confused by the sudden void in Klein's aura, struggling to process the shift. The dark, oppressive energy that previously saturated the arena vanishes into thin air. Klein stands alone in the center of the ring, his blade drawn and his posture perfectly steady. Onlookers murmur in the stands, wondering why the giant has suddenly lost his momentum. Klein closes his eyes for a brief second to center himself before addressing his opponent. He declares his intent to fight without necromancy, catching the entire crowd off guard. Identifying himself as a Rhineland, he insists on winning this trial through swordsmanship alone. Randall stares in disbelief, unable to reconcile the boy's lack of magical output with his earlier presence. The audience erupts as the realization sinks in that the youth is choosing to handicap himself. High-ranking spectators laugh at the audacity, dismissing the display as nothing more than a bluff. They convince themselves that Klein's earlier power was a mere coincidence, a trick of the light. Randall reaffirms his own superiority, convinced that raw physical strength and stamina will carry him. Imperial swordsmanship relies on unrestrained mana usage to push the body beyond human limits. The giant channels his energy, forcing his blood flow and muscles to expand to a lethal degree. Randall launches himself forward with explosive speed, closing the distance between them in a heartbeat, screaming for the Rhineland to die. He puts every ounce of his enhanced power into a fatal swing. The massive blade cuts through the air, creating a shockwave that rattles the entire arena floor. Klein keeps his eyes locked on the attack, tracking the trajectory of Randall's movement perfectly. His perception sharpens as he analyzes the giant's mana capacity and the rhythm of the strike. He watches the sword path unfold in slow motion, preparing to turn the giant's own momentum against him. Randall roars in frustration, his massive arm swinging with lethal intent toward the Rhineland air. The giant's blade descends with enough force to cleave through stone, yet his expression begins to shift. Blood sprays across the arena floor, but the target of the strike is nowhere to be found. Dust clouds billow up as the giant realizes he has missed his mark entirely. Randall stares at the empty space where Klein stood just an instant ago, his composure crumbling, moving with impossible grace. Klein has already repositioned himself behind the giant's exposed guard. Calling out the opening, Klein prepares to unleash a strike that Randall cannot possibly counter. The meteor sword technique tears through the giant's defenses, carving a deep wound into his back. Spectators recognize the legendary technique instantly, their faces twisted in disbelief at the display of skill. Randall lets out a pained cry, the sheer impact of the blow forcing him to his knees, clutching his wound. The giant demands to know how Klein could achieve such power without using mana. Onlookers whisper among themselves, struggling to process the impossible feat they just witnessed. The commander watches the arena, her eyes wide as she realizes the true extent of Klein's potential. Back in the private chambers, the situation is discussed as a tactical risk for the Rhineland name. A high-ranking official questions the decision to allow the duel, fearing the fallout of a defeat. He argues that Klein stands no chance against an imperial opponent, urging for an intervention. The elder explains that Klein is fighting to restore his late mother's honor, a burden he must carry alone. Regret fills his voice as he admits his failure to protect Klein from the monastery's shadow. He declares that this fight belongs to the boy, refusing to strip away his chance at redemption. Watching the match reach its climax, he places his faith in the young master to survive. Onlookers debate if Klein should have taken this fight, but the clash is already well underway. Randall stares him down, clearly reeling from the display of skill. Klein explains that the Rhineland style prioritizes maximum efficiency over raw mana output. His grin widens as he notes that while raw power is currently low, it remains more than sufficient to dismantle a fighter like Randall. Enraged by the insult, the giant bares his teeth and prepares a desperate move. A violent surge of energy ripples outward, forcing Randall into a final, agonizing effort. Observers recognize the aura instantly, identifying it as Randall's signature technique. This mana explosion is designed to lock his opponent in place. Randall screams that he will be the victor, dismissing Klein's previous taunts, lunging forward with everything he has left. The giant aims to crush him, an ally shouts a warning as the strike descends. Klein is forced into the air, narrowly dodging the lethal sweep. Sparks fly as their blades grind against each other in the center of the arena. Randall mocks him, claiming that any sword infused with such immense mana will surely shatter. Pressure mounts on the steel, causing the blade to fracture under the strain. Jagged cracks spread across the metal as the weapon fails. Laughter erupts from the giant, gloating over the broken blade. He channels his remaining strength into a final, glowing red strike. Klein merely smiles in the chaos, realizing the trap has finally closed around his opponent. Klein pivots, driving his blade clean through Randall's hand in a display of brutal precision. The impact forces the giant's weapon to drop as his grip is completely compromised. Silence descends on the arena, Klein declaring the fight finished. Onlookers stare in disbelief at the sudden turn of events. Observers realize Klein used the Rhineland style with minimal mana, perfecting every movement despite the difficulty. He baited the giant into overextending, creating the opening for a lethal close-range strike. Klein stands tall, his victory over the veteran combatant absolute. Randall screams in agony, staring at his severed hand as blood pools on the ground. His panicked subordinates rush to stop the hemorrhaging, desperate to keep their leader alive. Healers scramble to apply basic magic, though the damage is far beyond simple repair. Klein watches the chaos, questioning whether such a grievous injury can even be reversed. The medical team confirms only basic stabilization is possible, requiring a prosthetic to replace the lost limb. Klein sighs at the limitations of modern healing arts, his focus shifting toward the approaching figure of Klein. The newcomer confronts Klein, questioning how he can remain so cold after witnessing such a gruesome mutilation. Klein pauses, briefly forgetting the persona he needs to maintain in this setting. He quickly pivots to act the part of a terrified youth, playing up the shock for the crowd. Delkin Conwell erupts in fury, unable to accept that his champion Randall has been so thoroughly dismantled. Klein stands his ground, firmly demanding that the Count honor the terms of their wager. Delkin Conwell rages against the loss of his reputation and his personal knight, refusing to accept defeat. His frustration boils over into a violent outburst, signaling the total collapse of his composure. Klein focuses his gaze directly on Delkin Conwell, turning the tables with a terrifying display of power. The Count loses his grip on reality as an invisible force clamps down on his throat. Confusion twists Delkin Conwell's face when he realizes he can no longer control his own body. Klein issues a cold command from his position as the winner, forcing the Count to acknowledge his sins. A dark, suffocating aura begins to seep into the Count's mind, breaking his will to fight. Klein leans in to deliver the final psychological blow, demanding the man bow and beg for mercy. Purple shadows erupt around the Count, manifesting the overwhelming weight of the dead he so foolishly provoked. A spectral entity looms over Delkin Conwell, pinning him to the ground with sheer necromantic pressure. The Count can only choke out gasps of agony as his mental defenses shatter under the assault. Delkin Conwell finally breaks, falling to his knees in total submission as he realizes his massive error. Klein reveals the source of the torment, explaining that the voices of the dead are now tearing through the Count's psyche. The necromancy formula induces pure, unadulterated terror, leaving the once haughty noble weeping and begging for forgiveness. Guilt and fear consume the man as he confesses to harming Klein and insulting Grand Duchess Claire. Onlookers watch in absolute disbelief, unable to process how a pillar of the collateral branch collapsed so easily. Klein signals that this display is merely the beginning of his true intentions. Gathering the attention of the entire crowd, he prepares to make a public declaration. He asserts his status as the trial winner and the rightful victor of this confrontation. Identifying himself as the son of Grand Duchess Claire Ray de Lacies, he claims his true heritage. Klein introduces the second hero of the North, Heinkel Rhineland, to stand by his side. The young lord stands tall under the gaze of the crowd, finally declaring his identity as Klein Rhineland. Mysterious figure stands in the shadows, reciting a solemn prayer about walking paths where light cannot reach. His hands remain clasped in devotion as he asks for divine guidance through the coming treachery. The statue of the God of Light looms over the silent hall, bearing witness to these clandestine words. Cardinal Morlock steps out of the darkness to greet Garrison, who has been waiting in the sacred space, noticing Garrison's troubled demeanor. The Cardinal demands a status report on the undead attack and the mysterious Necromancer. Garrison remains unfazed, brushing off the concerns by insisting that the chaos was entirely according to their design, revealing that the Necromancer was a deliberate imperial plant. He explains the true purpose of the operation. Terror is their tool, as mass panic drives the terrified commoners to seek salvation within the Holy Order. The Cardinal grins at the prospect of using these sacrifices to revive their waning influence and spread divine will. Suddenly, the facade of their alliance shatters as the Cardinal is seized by the throat with overwhelming force. The attacker declares that a servant of the temple has fallen into heresy and must be purged. Garrison struggles to breathe as his life is squeezed out by the relentless grip of his assailant. Desperation clouds his eyes as he gasps for mercy. Realizing his plans have just hit a terminal snag, the light leaves his face as his body goes limp. The victim of a sudden, brutal execution, his lifeless corpse is discarded on the floor like trash, the consequence of his betrayal being paid in full. The mysterious killer stands over the body, mockingly asking if his target feels any better now, walking away from the carnage. He calls out Garrison Birkman for being a fool who failed to recognize his own end. Archbishop Palaminel reveals himself from the gloom, his calm expression contrasting sharply with the violence he just committed. Turning to face the newcomer, the assassin demands to know if Palaminel was the one pulling these strings. Palaminel steps over the dead body with cold indifference, confirming his involvement while hinting at new, dangerous information. Palaminel keeps pressing his agenda, pushing past the carnage to explain the truth behind the target. His words cut through the tension as he details the lingering traces of necromancy left at the scene. Cardinal Morlock realizes the gravity of the situation as Palaminel confirms that necromancy always leaves a trail. The Archbishop produces a cross recovered from the dead Necromancer, presenting it as undeniable evidence. He explains that while the Empire focuses on reanimation, this artifact points toward a much darker, soul-based forbidden art. Morlock struggles to process the mention of an archetypal necromancy, his confidence faltering under the weight of this new intel. The realization hits that two different necromancers were present at the site of their supposed victory. Palaminel demands his full attention, dragging his mind away from the dead to focus on the living. He drops the bombshell that the target they have been tracking, the second son of the Rhineland, is no ordinary noble. Morlock freezes as the identity of the target is finally laid bare, changing everything he thought he knew. The scene shifts to the young master himself, currently standing among his companions, completely unaware of the threat closing in. Palaminel confirms the terrifying truth that Klein Rhineland is, in fact, a practicing necromancer outside in the storm. A lone figure works in the dark, unaware of the revelation happening in the halls of power. A pickaxe strikes the earth with rhythmic, heavy force, tearing through the frozen ground. The worker continues his labor deep into the night, the sound of metal on stone echoing through the rain. Fatigue begins to set in as he pauses, letting out a weary sigh before returning to the grueling task. Suddenly, a massive shadow looms over him, the dark presence signaling that the situation is spiraling out of control. The ground shatters beneath the force of an unseen impact, throwing debris into the air as the calm night explodes into violence. Meanwhile, a small dollmaker stares at a stitched figure in her hands, her eyes wide with mounting dread. She realizes with horror that the doll she crafted perfectly mimics the face of the young Lord Klein, a mistake that feels like a bad omen. A week has flown by since the trial, and Klein finds himself in a room filled with light laughter, reflecting on his recent victory over Randall and the public confession he squeezed out of Count Conwell. Even with the accolades, the 15-year-old struggles with the sheer physical limits of his current body, as he gets scolded for reading while his companion tries to goad him into some actual play, dismissing the book as just another novel, though Klein knows exactly what is hidden inside those pages. The cover might look plain, but the contents are anything but common, with hand-drawn spell formations and complex notes on anatomy. The text serves as a manual for his necromancy, currently capped at summoning 11 skeletons. Klein realizes he needs to drastically improve his control and research. Knowing the local priest is actively hunting for any sign of a necromancer, he desperately needs to reclaim his former power before he is hunted down by the church. New report arrives detailing strange sightings in the local mine, describing these creatures as undead, which gives Klein the perfect excuse to investigate. He decides to head out immediately, viewing real combat as the ultimate form of research for his skills. Unbothered by the dangers, he realizes this mission is the perfect opportunity to practice his dark arts in complete isolation. The Duke assigns a guard to accompany him, ensuring he has at least some oversight on the journey. Night falls over the mission site as the group sets up a makeshift camp under the stars. His companion offers him a hot skewer of food, forcing Klein to pause his intense focus for a quick bite. Although his mind remains occupied with the work he needs to accomplish, Klein stares at the charred piece of meat, realizing that even this simple mission holds unexpected lessons for his growth. Klein watches Dunkel fumble with the campfire, silently judging the knight's lack of basic survival skills. Dunkel turns away in shame, unable to meet his young master's gaze while insisting he just focus on eating, chewing on a skewer. The knight claims 10 years in the order prepared him for anything but this. Klein studies him, wondering if the man is really as dense as he appears to be. Dunkel muses that the young noble acts far beyond his years, especially regarding his hidden swordsmanship and combat spirit. Dropping the bombshell that Klein reminds him of the legendary necromancer Archimond himself. Klein snaps back immediately, telling Dunkel to never breathe that name near the church's priest, realizing the weight of the comparison since Archimond once butchered millions of northerners to fuel his undead legions. The campfire suddenly flares up with an unnatural, violent intensity. Flames lick the air as if reacting to the dark conversation. Dunkel notices a strange shift in the air, mistaking the sudden pressure for a simple gust of wind. Klein knows better, sensing something far more sinister is closing in on their location. He snaps at Dunkel to drop the forbidden topic once and for all. Dunkel looks confused by the sudden shift in atmosphere. Metal scrapes against stone as Dunkel instinctively draws his blade. Screams echo from the distant village walls, shattering the silence of the night. Terrified villagers scramble as a horde of undead begins to tear through the town. Rotting corpses surge forward, hungry for the living. Klein watches the chaos erupt, his eyes narrowing as he recognizes the threat. The ground erupts in a flash of light, signaling the start of the massacre. Dunkel whirls around to find Klein already engaging the undead. Violet energy surges from Klein's blade as he cuts down the first attacker. Dunkel demands an explanation for his sudden display of power. Klein simply orders him to focus on the survivors instead. An undead villager collapses under the weight of the assault. Survivors recognize Klein as the heir of the Rhineland family. Klein pivots to the tactical situation, questioning the origin of these monsters. He identifies the threat as the same forbidden reanimation magic that targeted him in the forest. A villager explains that these attacks began 2 months ago when the mine access was restricted. Klein is blindsided by the realization that these reanimated corpses are the villagers' own kin. A grieving man lunges at Klein in a fit of rage. Dunkel physically intercepts the man to protect his young master. The man screams that the Rhineland family ignored their pleas for help for months. Pointing at a corpse on the ground, the man reveals his father was among the victims. Memories of his father's hard work in the mine haunt the man as he breaks down. He demands to know why they must endure this suffering. Klein stares back at the chaotic scene, his expression unreadable. The name Archimond echoes in the air as the man accuses Klein of being the necromancer. Klein's composure snaps, his patience finally hitting a breaking point. Violet flames erupt around Klein as he snaps at the man to shut up, rejecting any blame for the village's plight. The villager freezes in disbelief. Klein reminds the man that he is not the one responsible for the undead. Dunkel tries to intervene, but Klein steps forward, his hand glowing with intense blue energy. Echoing a solemn vow, Klein begins to command the suffering spirits of the dead. Blue light washes over the corpses as Klein promises to illuminate their path and grant them peace. The energy surges from Klein's hand, wrapping around the fallen as they begin to rise in a spectral form. Glowing silhouettes of the villagers detach from their physical bodies. Klein gazes at the spirits, his face locked in a focused expression. Ancient runes materialize in the air between the Lord and the departed. Klein acknowledges the silent communication. Dunkel watches in awe as he identifies the phenomenon as soul resonance. Recognizing the technique from the Northern Plague, he realizes the magnitude of what Klein is doing. The villager stares at his father's glowing form. Spectral light consumes the remaining traces of the undead bodies. Columns of blue light rise into the night sky. Klein lowers his hand as the spirits peacefully ascend. The villager points toward the mountain path, offering the location of the mines. He demands to know the nature of the conversation Klein just held with the spirits. Klein brushes off the inquiry, keeping his own counsel as they prepare to move out. Klein reveals the spirits were actually begging for revenge, but he shuts down Dunkel's suspicion that he might be the reincarnation of Archimond, firmly warning him to never speak those words aloud again. Yet Dunkel pushes back, gripping his sword until the blade reflects a cold, hard resolve, and he demands to know the true identity of the man standing before him, questioning if this is really the same Klein Reinland who spent years in seclusion, while memories of the young master's return flood back, specifically the rumors about his cursed bloodline and those unsettling, pitch-black eyes, which seemed far too devoid of life for a mere child. And the nightmare began with the discovery of a dead cat in the kitchen, followed by another in the garden, then a third, until a total of 7 bodies were found scattered across the estate, sparking dark whispers among the servants about the infant's alleged affinity for dark arts, and the conviction that the cursed blood of his mother's side had truly manifested, though Klein remained indifferent to the gossip once he finally returned to the manor. Leaving the staff to grapple with the impossibility of a child pulling off such horrors, and the investigation into the past continues under the moonlight, until Dunkel notices something shift in the darkness ahead, where a lone lantern light flickers down the corridor and they spot Klein walking away, leaving the heavy questions hanging in the air. Dunkel watches the young lord venture out alone into the dead of night, gripping his lantern tightly as he follows the trail of light. Sword ready at his side in case the darkness hides something lethal, moving through the desolate stone path toward the edge of the estate, where the sharp caw of a crow marks their arrival at the old graveyard, and Dunkel lingers in the shadows, questioning why Klein would choose this grim location, keeping a distance to avoid being spotted among the weathered headstones, but he can barely contain his confusion as he watches the boy kneel. So he finally calls out to Klein, his voice cutting through the silence, revealing the young lord surrounded by the bodies of the dead animals, and Klein calmly explains he is performing a funeral rite for the fallen, claiming the lesions indicate a disease that is fatal to animals but harmless to men. So he continues to carefully clean the remains to prevent the contagion from spreading, while Dunkel stares in disbelief, warning him that such a task is beneath his station. Though the young lord insists that someone must do the work regardless of status, leaving Dunkel to struggle with the weight of that simple, detached answer, and the man finally draws his blade, demanding to know the true identity of the boy, so Klein turns to face him, asking if he remembers the first maxim of Berkel Reinland, before reciting that a being is defined by their actions rather than their status. And he confirms his own existence as a testament to that truth, staring down the night. Klein challenges Dunkel to make his move since he has been shadowing him for so long, but the knight hesitates with his blade drawn, clearly weighing his options against the boy, and the tension hangs heavy between them as the steel glints in the dark, while Dunkel admits he is undecided about Klein's true nature and refuses to kill him yet. Insisting that the person he serves is the true heir of Rhineland, not some monster, and Klein simply stares back, absorbing the knight's declaration without backing down, before dryly thanking Dunkel for the backhanded compliment regarding his humanity. Then he raises a flaming torch high to illuminate the dark, cavernous space ahead, and the light reveals a horrifying sight of scattered bones littering the ground. So the two men step into the graveyard of remains, scanning the shadows for movement, while the stench of decay fills the air, confirming that something foul is lurking nearby, and suddenly 7 animated skeletons emerge from the darkness, closing the distance between them, so Klein wastes no time channeling his magical energy to summon his own undead forces, and his incantation rips through the silence, manifesting skeletal warriors to counter the threat. While Dunkel wheels around in shock at the sudden appearance of Klein's summoned guardians, then Klein issues a sharp command to charge, driving his army into the fray, and the two forces collide in a burst of spectral energy and clashing bone, so the skirmish intensifies as the knights and skeletons trade blows in the cramped tunnel, while the summoned warriors systematically tear through the enemy ranks with chilling efficiency. And Dunkel watches in disbelief, asking if such creatures exist, only for Klein to dismiss the question as a common reaction from mercenaries. The skeletal onslaught continues as Klein's summoned warriors hack through the swarm, but Dunkel warns Klein of a massive incoming horde, urging them to move quickly. Then Klein pauses, detecting the deep guttural growls echoing from the tunnel depths. Estimating that 40 enemies are closing in, he realizes they are severely outnumbered. So Klein begins an incantation to break the spectral bonds holding the fallen, and his magic surges, forcibly stripping away the enemy's control over their own bodies. While Dunkel watches the blue energy weave into the fallen, asking what he is doing, Klein explains he is converting the suppressed undead into their own personal allies, calling it a fundamental necromancy tactic to even the odds against a larger force. As the newly converted soldiers rise to join the fight, Dunkel processes the sudden shift, and Klein orders the vanguard to charge, beckoning Dunkel to follow him into the fray. The duo pushes forward, supported by their rapidly growing army of spectral skeletons. Enemy lines break under the pressure of the fresh arrivals, screaming as they fall. Klein's forces pivot with precision, cutting down the opposition in the cramped corridor. Instructing his rear guard to maintain momentum, he keeps the pressure on the enemy, strikes land with lethal force, clearing a path through the dense pack of skeletons, and the battlefield becomes a blur of motion as the converted army dominates the tunnel. Dunkel marvels at the sight, baffled that low-level skeletons are fighting with such human-like skill, observing that Klein has turned a mindless mob into a disciplined, organized military unit. The tunnel falls quiet as the last of the enemies are dismantled, leaving only blood on the walls. Standing over the carnage, Klein and Dunkel survey the path they just carved. Dunkel struggles to grasp how Klein decimated a force 4 times their size, but Klein insists on total trust as they venture deeper into the unknown, pressing forward into the dark. The pair notes how far they have traveled. Blood drips from a wound on Klein's face, signaling the toll this journey is taking. A faint, desperate plea for help echoes through the chamber, catching their attention. Klein raises his torch, calling out to identify the source of the human voice, only to hear a broken, agonizing whisper begging them to end its suffering, revealing a chamber filled with captives suspended in the air by dark, pulsing chains. Realizing these are the missing villagers sacrificed for a gruesome, soul-returning ritual. A mysterious figure emerges from the shadows, mocking Klein for his extensive knowledge. She explains that the art requires high-quality bodies to reanimate as mindless minions. Klein narrows his eyes, recognizing her tone as something specific to their kind. The woman lowers her hood, revealing a face from a past he thought was buried, acknowledging their shared history. She greets him by his title, Lord Archimand. Klein stares back, clearly unsettled to find her operating in this forgotten place. A sudden, bizarre shift occurs as a hand offers him a single, plain cookie. The scene transitions to a victory in the trial by combat, shifting the perspective. Klein, accompanied by his companions, prepares to meet his superior while changing his attire, and the weight of their next move looms as he considers the path ahead. Leia catches a glimpse of Klein and his group walking away, prompting her to wonder if she has been spotted, questioning her own cowardly impulse to stay out of sight instead of just stepping forward.